All right, we had a doozy of a patch, so let's just get right into it because tons of different changes. Pretty much all the good comps, they are all new except for like one of them. So let's just get right into it. So best comps for patch 11.12, which just came out 2 days ago. I update this tier list every Friday, both on my channel and on my website. So S tier is Dawnbringer Karma, Mordekaiser Draven. I think these two are the best right now. And then this is followed by Nightbringer Yasuo, Nightbringer Aphelios, Varus. And then in the B tiers are like kind of all the playable tiers right now. A lot of comps, if you have like the good start for them, you could go ahead and play them. This goes for both the B and the C tier. Like if you get 7 Vaynes to start off the game, go ahead and do Vayne reroll. No one's going to stop you there. But I don't recommend going for the Bs and Cs right now. It's mainly just S and As. But these are Assassins, Legionnaire, Abomination, Vel'Koz, Hellion, Kayle Knights, Renewer, Skirmishers, and Abomination. And then in the C tier, Draconic, Sett, Spellweaver, Cavalier, Forgotten Draven, Draconic Zyra, Draconic Ashe, and Vayne reroll. And keep in mind, guys, again, like it doesn't mean they can't win if you're on the B and C tier. A lot of these comps actually are really, really good at winning. They're just difficult to hit, which is why they are lower in the tier, because the way to measure a composition's strength is both how well it does and how often you can go for it. One other note before we get into how to play everything is there's a lot of like really, really good late game stuff, such as the Heimerdinger Ivern Volibear combo. And I make a note of that here. You want to play one of these comps and then transition into a late game bomb with a bunch of legendaries. If you're going like an ability power comp, of course, putting ability power items on Teemo and Heimerdinger are going to do much better than like a Vel'Koz. That doesn't mean that Vel'Koz is bad. It just means that he's a tool to get to late game in that sense. So with that in mind, let's get into the comps. So in the S tier, Dawnbringer Karma is the best version of Karma right now. You can run Dawnbringers with a bunch of different carries. There are 2 builds on it. We're going to only go over the Karma build right now, but I am making a guide on both the Karma and the reroll version a bit later. But Karma just needs 1 tier item. It could be like a mana regeneration item such as Shojin or Blue Buff, or it could just be a tier item such as like a Shadow Hand of Justice. I like having at least one of those. There are going to be some people who say like, yo man, I heard like 3 damage items is really good, and it is, but it's really good in the late game. In the mid game, having the mana item is much more important. So the best item really just depends on what your game's looking like. If you can make it to level 9 for the super late game and get like 2-star frontline such as Garen 2-star, Taric 2-star, and Ivern Volibear 2-star, go ahead and build 3 damage items. If you cannot, I do recommend having at least like a Spear of Shojin or a blue buff on Karma plus 2 damage items. So 6 Dawnbringer is like just by default the best mid-game board that you can get with Dawnbringer Karma. And the reason behind that is because 6 Dawnbringers are really cheap units. You run like Gragas and Kha'Zix and Soraka. Those are all really affordable, and it's like a strong enough playable team that Karma just solo carries the rest of the types of fights that you run into. Also, like the Dawnbringer buff is pretty good. It buffs up the damage and it heals your champions by a lot. Round out the late game with Invokers with Ivern at level 7 and then Taric at level 8 for just like tankiness. After that, you could transition into the HIV combo, Heimerdinger, Ivern, Volibear. I like the 4 Invoker version with Syndra and Teemo as well, but you could do 2 Invoker and just run more legendaries instead. Really up to you there. And then the leveling pattern for this is pretty standard. You just like play how you normally would in most other games. Now onto Draven Mordekaiser. This comp changes a lot, pretty much every patch, but any combination of Draven, Mordekaiser, and 6 other units is going to be doing pretty well. In this version, we have like all the expensive guys. So you could see here, we're like pretty much all 4 and 5 cost units. You pretty much flex the entire game. You just want at least 3 Forgotten for the Draven and 2 Legionnaire. After that, like nothing else really matters that much. You could go 4 Dragon Slayer, you could go 4 Knights, you could go like 3 or 4 Mystic. You can literally do anything. You could go a bunch of Ironclads. That's what's great about this composition. It's pretty flexible and you could kind of just go it whenever. Draven himself is not that good right now, but the comp is really flexible and you're going to be doing really well if you are able to flex it a bunch. On to the next tier, we have Nightbringer Yasuo. This is a great reroll comp. So you do reroll Yasuo, you go to level 7 and then slow roll for Yasuo 3-star. And if you don't know what any of these terms mean, like slow rolling, fast state, all that stuff, definitely check out the leveling guide that I have on my channel. I'll post a link to it in my description. So this comp is pretty hit or miss. If you get 2-star Yasuo, you're going to have an okay game, but it's not really going to be that great unless you hit some late game bombs. But if you are able to hit a 3-star Yasuo, of course, you're going to be doing extremely well, and that is definitely like the version that's preferred for this comp. I like having a Runon's, Rapid Fire Cannon, and Jeweled Gauntlet, but the items are pretty flexible. You could go Shadow Handed Justice, you could do other sorts of AP items, but this is the combo I like now. You could also go for 3-star Lee Sin and Morgana, as they're both Nightbringers, and you could do like any sorts of combination. I like having at least 4 Nightbringers, but you could go for 6. You could go for 2 Dragon Slayer instead if you go for 6 Nightbringers, and you could go like maybe more Legionnaires if you hit the good ones, but I generally do not like the Legionnaire version that much. On to the next build, we have Nightbringer Aphelios. Aphelios is very similar to Draven. Lots of different flexible teams you could play with it. I prefer having 4 Ranger, but having 2 Ranger is fine as well if you have like a really good front line. So Aphelios or Draven, they're kind of the 2 attack damage compositions that you could like play either or, and it's going to be really good. They use slightly different items, like Aphelios does prefer having a Rage Blade, but they both share Bloodthirster, they could both use IE, they could both use Last Whisper, and they both share a lot of the frontline units because you just need tanks whenever you have an attack damage carry. So with that in mind, you could build attack damage items in the early game, go for either Aphelios or Draven, and then when you roll down at level 7 or level 8, just go for whichever one you hit. That's typically what I've been wanting to do. Onto the next build, we have another reroll comp. This is Varus. This comp did get nerfed slightly, but I actually think it's like really, really good because you could use this to transition into pretty much any build because Varus can use all sorts of different items. He could use mana items such as Spirit Shogun. He could use ability powers. He could use attack damage. He could use Runons. He could use Rage Blade. So he could pretty much use every item that we've seen in the other S and A tier comps really, really effectively. So you could just play him in the early game. If you do like a reroll at level 6 for Varus 3-star, and you see that you're not hitting it, you could stop rerolling and then go level up instead and go for the other comps that we mentioned before based on whichever items you have. But if you do get a lot of him, get him 3-star, you're going to be doing pretty well in your game. Probably not win the game unless you go level 9 and get a bunch of legendaries, but you could definitely go top 4, top 3 pretty reasonably with a Varus 3-star. I like rounding him out with a bunch of Mystics, especially with Kindred, and for him, I've tried 4 Ranger, but if I do go for 4 Ranger, I'd rather go for a Aphelios build, but I like the 6 Redeemed version a lot. In this screen right here, we have the 4 Knight version. Either or works, honestly. It just depends on what you're hitting in your game. If you guys haven't noticed yet, a lot of these comps in this current patch, there isn't like too much that's viable. I only have like 4 S and A tier comps, but in each of those comps, you could go like 5 different options. So I think one-tricking in this particular patch is very, very useful because you just go for one sort of carry and then just flex the team comps between them. But with that in mind, let's get into the B tiers. So Assassins, like, they got nerfed a lot. Riot likes to nerf comps really, really hard. Are they still playable? Yes, but I don't think they needed that many nerfs, especially with the critical strike changes, because I think that affected Assassins a lot because they built Infinity Edge like a ton. I don't really subscribe to that philosophy, but what you should do is probably subscribe to my channel because I'm coming out with TFT guides every single week, along with the meta snapshot, along with a lot of gameplays and how-tos in this video game. So back to the Assassins, we have either Nocturne or Katarina carry. LeBlanc is just not a unit anymore. She's useful for stunning. You could still build a dark blue buff on her and she'll stun a lot of units. But as your primary carry, you're never going LeBlanc again because she does like 0 damage now. But Nocturne, he always hits people really hard. Katarina, she jumps around, does a ton of damage. Both of them are really good at rerolling. And notice how here I have 9 characters. You typically don't have 9 characters on Assassins, but your extra units that you play after you go 4 or 6 Assassin really depends on who your carry is. If you're going Katarina carry, you want Forgotten. That's why Rise is there. If you're going for Nocturne carry, you want the Revenants such as Ivern and Volibear. You could also run Coven with Katarina. You could do both Coven and the Forgotten with Rise if you are able to get Viego. But all those versions work. Just depends on who your carry is. Depends who you get to 3-star. And that's what's going to decide your game on who to go. So onto the next tier, we have Legionnaires. Riven got nerfed a little bit. I still think she's all right. She's just not as dominant as she was before. Obviously, if you get a 3-star Riven, you're going to be smacking people so hard because, I mean, 3-star Riven is something that's like super, super difficult to get. Most 3-star 3-cost units are hyper strong because, again, you run a big risk of not hitting them when you go for those sorts of compositions. And that's why they are kind of like very hit or miss. Notice how I list the variance as high down here. Best items for Riven. I like having a Runons for sure. RFC's okay, but Infinity Edge and Bloodthirster are critical if she's on the front line. And if you do not run Verdant, I think having a Quicksilver on her is very, very useful. Onto the next build, Vel'Koz. You could go Abomination or 6 Redeemed, both work. And my question to you is why are you going Vel'Koz when you could go Karma? They're both decent, right? They're both ability power carries, but I feel like Karma's path is just so much easier to play and so much like more forgiving. But if you manage to get a ton of Vel'Kozes, like go for it, you know? Onto the next build, or alternatively, if you're going for like redeemed Varus, you could just switch into the Vel'Koz build if you get a lot of Vel'Kozes that way too. So onto the next build, Hellion. This is like the most hit or miss composition there is because you either hit Teemo on 8 or you don't. Because Hellions in the early game right now, they're just not that strong. But their late game is incredible because you run the Teemo, Iron Volibear, Heimerdinger combo and you just destroy everyone as usual. That's like the default super late game that we have in the set. The only risk you run is sometimes you can't afford Teemo because your life total is too low. So definitely be careful of that. We have a full guide on here if you guys want more information on that. And again, all this stuff, all these like guides and links, they can all be found on my website at bunnymuffins.lol. So definitely check that out after you finish watching this video. Kayle Knights. I've been hating on this comp a lot, but I actually think it's like okay now, even after like slightly more nerfs to Kayle. The reason is because I think everything else got super nerfed, and I think she does decent against the current comps in the meta right now, but none of that really matters because you really are still reliant on hitting Kayle, and that's just a risk you run. But since I've been seeing a lot of people run Varus in the early to mid game right now, the transition into Kayle is actually pretty easy. Also, Rageblade is usable on a lot of different characters right now, and that makes Kayle a little better because now that you slam Rageblade in the early game, you have one additional comp you can go if you manage to hit it. And if you don't hit Kayle, you're fine. You could just go one of those other compositions, such as Aphelios, to use those items. Next build, we have Coven Renewer Soraka carry. This comp is like, if you have a lot of Sorakas, go for it. You know, I think you guys have noticed the pattern already. Like, if you have a lot of this champion, definitely try to go for them. But if you don't, you probably need to go for the S or A tier composition. So I'm not going to talk about this too much. You just reroll on level 6. Skirmisher, this is a little interesting because there's a new way to play Skirmishers now. So Jack's nerfed to the ground, he sucks, right? So what people have done instead is do like a reroll Skirmisher at level 7 and use Nidalee, Lee Sin, or Pantheon carry. It's pretty interesting. Lee Sin, you put ability power items and tank items on him. Nidalee, you put like Bloodthirster Runon's attack damage items on her. And it actually works pretty decently because you're probably going to hit the 3-star Lee Sin or Nidalee because no one goes for Nidalees, and other people are rerolling Yasuo. Lee Sin's a little more difficult to hit because other Yasuo players do go for Lee Sin because he's a Nightbringer, but Nidalee pretty easy to hit in my opinion because everyone's going for every other 3 cost in the game because who plays Nidalee in any other comp? Onto the next build, we are onto Abominations. Abominations, they got hit a lot, right? But if you have like Abomination Spatula, it's still good, and it's still very good in the early game, so this is a great tool to take you to the late game. However, once you get to the late game, you probably want to replace some of your Abominations because Abominations don't do well in the super late game because, I mean, you're running Brand and Callista, and no one wants to do that, you know? So you do need to get some huge bombs in order to supplement that, or just replace Abominations altogether once you reach, like, stage 6, for example. Onto the C tier, Sett, garbage now. I guess you could still play it if you start off Draconic on 2-1. You could go Ashe or Sett carry, but it's just more of like a, why are you doing that, you know? Also, like those situations where you do get Draconics on 2-1 is so rare. So it's like, why are you trying to go for it? Spellweaver Cavalier, pretty bad. I wouldn't go for this. They got nerfed way too much. And then Forgotten Draven, just played the other version of Draven. And then Draconic Zyra, don't do that. Draconic Ashe, we already talked about. And then reroll Vayne. Maybe it's still a thing. I don't know. I need to update this picture because you want Shadow Zeeks instead of Gwynsu's Rageblade. But it's a C tier, so I don't really update the C tiers that much. Onto the items like Carousel Priority. This is actually pretty flexible now, in my opinion. I think the first 5 items you see, sword, rod, tier, bow, and belt, are all really good. It just depends on what you're trying to go for. So belt's really good because Warmog's really good. Bow's really good for Yasuo, Riven, Aphelios, Varus, all those things. Tier is great for Karma. Rod is great for Karma or Vel'Koz. And then sword's just generally good because a lot of good items build out of sword. Pretty much every item that sword builds is usable in most compositions. I did update the item quadrant. It's the first time I updated it in a while. But since the meta is so dependent on like what carry you are running, I would just pay attention to the items that you have here. But if you are looking for like a general list of like what items good, definitely go ahead and check this out. It's a quadrant, so strong items are on the top, weak items on the bottom, situational items on the left, versatile items on the right. in case you guys are wondering about that there. So just to sum up, we have only like 5 really good compositions, I would say. And then the rest, like, they're still playable, but you need to like high roll them. So what is a high roll? Maybe if you get like Soraka 2-star before the game starts, like go for renewers, you know, something like that. Other than that, like these first 5 comps, they're pretty flexible. You can go in a lot of different directions, and you don't need the exact units that I put out in this meta snapshot, because that is not the right way to play the game. In the game, you need to be at least somewhat flexible in order to really maximize your climb. So definitely look out for that. If you are trying to like one trick, this is probably one of the best patches to do this. Just pick any of these compositions and just one trick them, learn all the ins and outs, learn when to put in this synergy instead of that synergy. That's really going to take you far. But that's pretty much all I have for today. Good luck on your climbs, guys, because the seasons, I think, is around like the midway point of the set. So if you guys need to get to like those last ranks, it's like now isn't like necessarily the crunch time, but it is like time to actually start taking the game seriously if you haven't already. So do let me know how your climbs are going so far down in the comments below. And apart from that, I will see you guys later.